Hey guys, welcome back to In Perspective, Xiaoling here, and in today's episode we're going to talk about my impressions of the PC version of The Division beta. So for those of you who don't know what The Division is, it's a third-person cover-based shooter RPG set in a near-future post-apocalyptic New York City, developed by Massive Entertainment and published by Ubisoft. So the basic premise of the game revolves around the fact that a smallpox pandemic has spread throughout the United States and has caused the collapse of the government, along with basic services such as food and water, and caused the country to quickly descend into chaos. Now you play an agent who's part of the Strategic Homeland Division, or the Division for short, and it's basically your job to prevent the fall of society as we know it and help put it back together. So the question is it worth climbing in to save this society? So upon loading into the game, you get to create your character. Unfortunately, all the customization options for the character were locked for the beta, and the only thing you could do was randomize. And they weren't actually random, they were basically just five or six presets or something like that you could cycle through, and then you'd pick one that you were happy with. It was a bit unfortunate that this was locked off, so we don't have an idea of how much customization or how deep the customization is going to be for the way your character looks. So even though The Division may appear to be a third-person action shooter, it is an RPG as well. So stats are a thing in this game. You have three primary statistics in the game. You've got your firearm skill, you've got your stamina skill, and you've got the electronic skill. So in addition to the three primary stats your character has perks as well, which were unfortunately not available in the beta. And you have three skill trees. So there's the medical skill tree, you had the technical and the security skill tree, all of which had skills in them. But unfortunately for the purposes of the beta, both the technical and security skill trees were locked off. So we only had access to one skill in each of those trees. So the way these abilities would be unlocked would be to upgrade your base, which is an instance for each player. You would basically unlock each wing in your base. So you've got a medical wing, you've got the technical wing, and you've got the security wing respectively. And by unlocking that wing, you unlock the skills, and by adding upgrades to that wing, you add the ability to get new perks, to get modifications for those skills. Modifications for the skills are kind of like what runes do in Diablo 3. You have your base skill, the modification will change, not essentially what the skill does, but it'll add a slightly different functionality to the skill. At any rate, most of these upgrades were locked off in the beta as well. So the only thing we had access to was basically the medical wing, so you could get some modifications for the sonar device that you had. But outside of that, no access at all. Moving on, there's crafting in the game as well, but I can't talk about that because that was locked out of the beta as well. And of course, in the beta you could level up as well. There are two leveling systems in the game. The first one is your PvE leveling system, so you level up by doing PvE content. And the second one is the Dark Zone level, which you get by actually doing content in the Dark Zone, which is a PvP enabled zone. But all in all, with regards to the loot, I don't think the loot is particularly interesting. But then again, I suppose it's probably quite difficult to get interesting loot in a setting like this. It's a semi-realistic setting, so you can't have imaginary weapons. The modifications for the weapons again were also quite generic. You would get sights and scopes and foregrips and barrel attachments and things like that would alter the performance of the weapon, like increase your firing accuracy or increase the damage or increase the percentage of crits, or that kind of thing. What you would expect in any kind of RPG. Moving on to the combat in the game, I don't think it was revolutionary. If you played any cover-based third-person action shooter, you'd probably be quite familiar with the way this works. By holding space, you dive behind cover. By pressing control, you can vault over cover, vault over objects. And by holding space, you can change between different covers in the environment. Right-clicking will pop you out of cover, and left-click will obviously shoot, or blind fire if you're not holding right-click. The combat was okay. I felt it didn't really have enough weight for my liking. I mean, it wasn't bad, and I understand that it's probably more difficult to create weighted combat in a third-person shooter than it is in a first-person shooter. Something to note though is that headshots aren't insta-kills, even though the setting is supposed to be quite a realistic setting. But what headshots do is crit. So if you are getting headshots on the enemy, they will be down much faster than if you're getting body shots. And finally, there are two distinct areas in the game. The PvE zones are for co-op and single player PvE only, where you can't actually damage other players. And then you've got the Dark Zone, which is basically a PvP focused zone the loot rewards are better, but there's also the risk of your loot being stolen from you. And the way it works is any loot you pick up in the dark zone is contaminated. You can only carry 6 pieces of this loot, so you need to choose carefully what you are going to keep or what you're going to discard, because not all of it is good. And once you fill up your bag, you can head over to one of the extraction sites on the map. You'd call in for a helicopter extraction, and then the helicopter would come and you'd put your bag onto the chopper and that would get extracted. But keeping in mind the helicopter only has space for 4 of these bags, so there may be combat to see who, is able to put their loot on the extraction helicopter. And again, people can also just kill you and take your loot instead of having to find it themselves. So there's a great risk reward factor when you are playing in the dark zone. So the question is, what did I think of the game? I do think that the dark zone was probably the most interesting part of the game. It has potential, very much a DayZ-esque type of feeling where you go in there with your loot and you can be killed by anyone and they can just take your loot. You don't know who you can trust. I think that mechanic is pretty cool. The dark zone is most enjoyable when playing with a team, and it creates some very interesting intense situations. There was only one single story mission in the game, and on normal mode it was a little bit easy, it wasn't very challenging. But on hard mode it was definitely more interesting. The enemies tended to flank you more, they did a lot more damage, so you had to play a lot more tactically, which made the combat much more interesting than the majority of combat that I found in the game. And also, because the beta was level capped, you'd hit the level cap pretty quick. I think in about 4 hours I managed to cover most of the content in the game. And then, no matter where you go in the PvE area, at least the enemies aren't particularly challenging, and they're just kind of a hindrance when you're trying to get from point A to B. They stop you and annoy you, and they don't drop any good loot and whatnot. With regard to the PvE areas, there was a very restricted area within the beta. As you can see on the map, the red area designated the beta area was about, a third of the map, maybe a little bit less than a third, and the dark zone was only one small zone as well. Everything else was locked off for the beta, so we didn't really get to experience anything else. The problem was, in the PvE area that we did play, there were no real roaming groups or gangs or anything like that. I've heard that there were supposed to be, and they were removed for the beta. And if that was the case, I'm not sure why they did that. My experience was basically that the game was a running simulator. I spent more time running between points than actually in combat. So I started to wonder why they didn't have an auto run button like they do in World of Warcraft or in Skyrim or something like that, where you can just tap a button and run. The world felt extremely empty. There were some civilians in the game. You could sort of give them canned food or water or a medkit, and they'd drop some cosmetic item or some loot for you. But outside of that, the NPC encounters were in the same places every time. The enemies would respawn after a while. But when you first started the game, you'd click on sort of a mission board, and it would highlight a bunch of encounters on the map. But the problem is, in playing single player, there was no way to reset these encounters. So you'd be playing, once you did all these encounters, they'd be gone for good. And then there was basically no other way to get XP except just, keep repeating the story mission over and over and over and over. There were a few other things. There was a side mission in the game where you had to sort of find a missing person. And that was kind of interesting, story-wise. And also there are these sort of remnant memories. So you can find these spots where you click on something, you get some XP, and then there's a bit of backstory as you sort of get a vision of the past, if you will. There's also loot scattered throughout in suitcases and backpacks and whatnot, but it's usually not very good. And what I did find is I didn't feel there was a great incentive to explore the world. It just felt like a big empty level with nothing much to do in it. And I think because of that, it started to feel very kind of boring. The UI itself was okay. It wasn't great. Could have been better. But, it did the job, I suppose. It conveyed the information that it needed to. The enemies were really, really easy to kill. You leveled up really quickly, you killed them quickly. They did say that the leveling wasn't indicative of the final game. It was changed specifically for the beta. Whether that's a good thing or not, I'm not entirely sure. I know some people are going to complain that headshots are not killing NPCs instantly. But as I said earlier, the headshots are rewarded with crits. But it does seem a little out of place in such a realistic setting, especially since this is a Tom Clancy game. I think what bothers me more is that the game at this point, at least in my impressions of the beta, feels extremely generic. Now that the beta is finished, nothing stands out to me. I don't sort of think, I'm looking forward to play more of The Division. It's not very memorable, to be honest, and that's unfortunate. I think that they should have allowed us more access to content. I think a lot of people are going to walk away from this beta with a more negative opinion than a positive. But I was hoping for something more. And it's very possible that the game will have that, but the beta wasn't an indication of that at all. If the full game is going to be more of what the beta was, a big empty world with kind of average, not that interesting encounters, I couldn't wholeheartedly recommend this game, and definitely not for $60. Rumor has it that there's going to be another beta sometime in February, later in February. Maybe they will allow access to more content, but that remains to be seen. As it stands at the moment, I think it's kind of generic. A very, very average game. Outside of the performance concerns which I mentioned in my port video. If you guys have any questions or comments regarding the video or the game, you can just let me know in the comment section below. Let me know what you guys thought of the game. Otherwise, I've been Sharling, and I'll see you next time. Let's get started. So heading over into the options screen under controls, we have everything you would expect to find. Mouse sensitivity and mouse aim sensitivity. Always nice to see that there are two separate options here. In the recent Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider, GPU usage is decent for the single GPU, and I'm being attacked. I'm trying to do a video, buddy. I have to mash E, of course. Right, now I'm gonna have to sort these guys out.